Hey, what's up, everybody? It's me, That One Weeb, back with another full story What If. For those of you who might be new, this is a story covering what if Deku had the power of Juggernaut from comics, which in this case gives him a unique set of abilities that he doesn't have in the original timeline, as well as changes the story a bit. So if you need to catch up, this is the perfect place because this captures the entire story with some extra content that will not be in the playlist. I hope you guys enjoy. Make sure to show your support either by hitting the like button, commenting down below, or I don't know, just watching the video. Just so you guys know, this is a compilation of various videos from the past, so my voice will probably change throughout it. I hope it's not too jarring, but I do hope you enjoy, and I'll see you at the end. Thanks, bye.
What if what if Deku had Juggernaut's powers from comics? So, yeah. So this was a suggestion by this cool dude who suggested this other one what if that I made too. So that's great. So he's helping me out. Thanks for the ideas. I'm not creative enough to come up with all of them. So thank you guys. And if you guys have any suggestions that you want to be made into videos, feel free to comment them down below. And if I have enough time and it's like an anime that I want to watch or something I can research, then I'll definitely look into it. Right now I have something about some Macau Knights that I'm looking into, but let's get into the story. Deku's born abnormally buff for a child. When he's born, it's very clear he has a quirk. He already has like a six-pack of abs, and his strength levels are that of maybe someone 4 years older than him. He learns to walk pretty fast, but his intelligence is a little bit lower than the original timeline. Izuku's mom's very proud of him and loves when he helps her out with stuff, and he loves his mom a lot. What happens is, when he's 4 years old, Baku tries to bully him for being all big and looking like a big marshmallow, since at this point, Deku looks like a bodybuilder during preschool. Baku tries to throw explosions at Deku, and this makes Deku cry, and then he punches Bakugo. Bakugo goes flying backwards and runs into the ground. He gets a scrape on his knee and elbow and starts crying. Then him and his friends run away and say that they'll get Deku next time. Deku cheers as he thinks that he just took down the villain as they were playing, as he was the hero. Later in life, as a middle schooler, Bakugo respects Deku, and every time he tries to fight him, he hasn't won yet. But he's gotten close a few times. Deku's abnormal strength is equal to that, to the point where his body looks just like All Might's, so Deku, being a fan of All Might, automatically thinks his quirk and All Might's are very similar, and that makes him super happy. As time had went on, his body had grown abnormally strong, to the point where he could do jumps and fly just like All Might could, but his technique was very poor, as he doesn't really know how to use his strength properly. Fast forward to the first episode of the anime. When Deku's sitting in school, the chair he has is actually a little bit larger than it's meant, since this Deku is basically the size of an adult man at the time of a middle schooler. So you can imagine just this buff dude with Deku's haircut and like jawline face sitting in this little kid desk. He's sitting there, and then he's writing his hero notebook about All Might and all other like big strong heroes, like especially this new Mountain Lady person. He really resonates with her on the big level. Eventually, school lets out, and Bakugo sees his notebook and he looks at it and says he's a hero notebook. He asks Deku why he even needs to bother writing down notes on heroes when he's so strong already. He says it's looking disgusted. Deku says that he wouldn't say that, and that he has a lot to work on. Bakugo scoffs and says that once his quirk gets stronger, he's gonna kick his ass. Oh, sorry, YouTube. Anyway, he then walks away, and then Deku begins to walk home. Deku walks past the fountain and starts walking down the same subway that he did in the original timeline. Some sludge starts to pull out of the sewers and begins to wrap around Deku's leg. Immediately, Deku feels this wet, gross thing beginning to wrap around his ankle and says, "Ew, that's nasty," and he kicks his foot back, thus shooting the sludge villain backwards. The sludge villain comes out and says he's going to take your body, you guy. And then Deku turns around and he sees this teenager kid with a super buff and tall body. He says he's definitely going to take it now and rushes towards Deku. Deku pulls his fist back and pushes forward and says, "Time to get decked," as he says, just like how Mirio says power. He does this, and then the sludge villain is instantly knocked back with a brush of wind. When he's out, Deku immediately cheers and says, "Ha, at least I didn't have to use my shield." which we'll elaborate on later. All Might comes preparing to defeat the villain and save whoever might be in the way. When he sees this buff hero-looking middle schooler who's standing there over the villain, holding his hands to his side just like a superhero in a comic book. All Might laughs a little bit and walks over and says hello. Deku, seeing All Might, immediately begins fanboying out and claps his hands together, which causes several rushes of wind. All Might sees that this kid has no clue how to control his power at all, as he's just too strong. Eventually, All Might asks him what he wants to do, and Deku tells him that he wants to be a strong hero, just like him. Then he asks Deku what kind of quirk he has. Almost coughed again. Sorry about that. Sorry, I'm feeling a little under the weather. All Might asks Deku about his quirk, and Deku tells him that his quirk is called Juggernaut. There's this sort of energy that fills throughout his body that makes all of his muscles amped to the maximum potential they can be, as well as him giving him super strength, super speed, as well as some other abilities. He tells All Might about his shield. It's this sort of protective layer of energy that coats the outside of his body. When fist or anything touches it, it can't really get through to him, and he calls it his thick skin. Eventually, All Might says this is interesting and asks if he'd like to train with him. Deku's super excited by the prospect, says of course, and then All Might leaps off and says he'll catch up with him. Deku, wanting to see where All Might's going, as he's a little bit less smart, jumps off after him, and All Might turns to the right and sees Deku jumping in the air just like him, which makes him surprised as he's been using like 20% of One For All in order to do that kind of skill. At this point, Deku lands on the hospital building and All Might's about to poof. When All Might poofs, Deku, not knowing what's happening, sees a skinny man and wonders where All Might went. All Might, realizing he can make Deku leave like this, says that All Might went that way. Deku jumps off the building and runs away. Then, suddenly, All Might realizes that the bottles are missing out of his pockets. When that kid had flown right next to him, he realized he dropped them accidentally when he was surprised. Bakugo, kicking the bottle at that exact moment, unleashes the slug villain, which begins to take him over. Deku hears an explosion and realizes what might have happened. He runs over towards where Bakugo was, and then finds that he's there, inside of the sludge villain that was trying to take him over. Deku, being enraged by what is happening to his friend, rushes over at top speed, a wake of wind traveling behind him as his strong legs push him forward. He crunches his fist backwards behind him, and then yells with everything he has, a mock of All Might's. He says, what should we call it? Well, you can name the attack. What kind of attacks do you guys want? I'll put a poll in the description. Anyway, he shouts this attack, and then he punches the villain, causing a whirlwind of air to push the villain, and as he pulls Bakugo to safety. The sludge villain goes flying into bits, and the weather begins to change. At this point, Deku holds his fist up in the air and smiles to the crowd behind him. Everyone cheers, and the heroes are wondering what hero this could be, and why he's wearing a large middle schooler outfit. Then, Bakugo scoffs and says, "Damn you, Deku, how dare you do this and take my spotlight? I could have had it all by myself." He then walks off. All Might in the crowd, seeing what had happened, is amazed by his strength, and realizes that he could even be on par with One For All. He starts determining on whether or not he should give Deku One For All. Anyway, on his walk back home, Deku begins to walk back to his house. All Might, appearing out of nowhere seemingly, comes out of nowhere in his strong form, and then poofs back to normal. Deku, realizing it's the same old guy from before, asks what happened to All Might and why is he here. Then All Might explains to Deku what his real form is and how it actually works. He then tells Deku all about One For All and how it's a strong quirk passed on from user to user, and that he thinks that if he gave him One For All, he could handle it right now, as well as that it might be even stronger than him. Deku, amazed, says that he'll train hard and that he'll do whatever it takes to make All Might proud of him. All Might plucks one of his hairs out and gives it to Izuku. Izuku ingests it without pretty much any question, as he doesn't really see the problem with this. Then, a few days later, they meet up at Dagobah Beach, where they begin their training for the UA entrance exams. As Deku takes the hair from All Might's hand, he looks at him and then at the hair and questions it. He asks All Might what is he doing. Then, All Might looks towards Deku and says that his strength is almost rivaled to that of One For All, and that even without training, his body's almost definitely ready, just like his was when he first inherited One For All. and that he wants Deku to be the new successor. He can see the light in his eyes, and how his strength he uses to protect people, and how his ego doesn't overtake him, even though he's so strong at a kid his age. All Might finds that this power of Deku's, perhaps connected with One For All, would create the strongest hero of all time. He tells Deku to ingest the hair that he gave him. Deku does as he's told by his favorite idol, and he does so, though it's a little hard and he coughs a little bit after he eats it. He then looks towards All Might and says he did that. All Might then says that tomorrow he wants him to meet him at Dagobah Beach. Deku goes to bed that night, and the next day is Saturday, as he has off school that day. Deku walks towards Dagobah Beach at a pretty slow pace. He doesn't feel any different after ingesting All Might's powers, but then he gets there. All Might sees him and tells him what he wants him to do. He says, "Alright, young Midoriya, I want you to use your power as you normally use it to try and clear the rubble. Then, after an hour, I'm going to ask you to use your power in conjunction with One For All in order to do it, and see how much faster you can." Deku, confused about what's going on still, says he'll follow All Might's orders and do exactly what he says. He then begins picking up garbage and tossing it with his gigantic strength boost and just throwing it completely far away. And he builds a huge pile on the left side of the beach. He's about, let's say, 60% of the way done with the left side of the beach by the time the hour runs up. Deku is sweating a little bit by this point as he's been carrying refrigerators and other heavy things consistently for that hour. Then, All Might tells him to turn on One For All. Deku closes his eyes and squeezes his hands. Nothing happens. He then looks to All Might and says, "What do you want me to do?" He tells him to squeeze his buttocks, and then with all of his heart he wants him to think about Smash. And he explains how One For All is an energy that's been a stockpile quirk, and how it flows through you like energy. Deku tries to envision this, but it's kind of hard. He tries it again. He closes his eyes and thinks of a waterfall. A waterfall falling on him and watering down his shoulders like a stream, waving through a forest path. He finally opens his eyes, and electricity shoots out of his right arm. He has all of 100% of One For All concentrated in just that one arm that he was squeezing. All Might sees this and thinks that he's got this, so he tells him to start doing it. All Might starts picking up Deku starts picking up the trash and throwing it away again. This time it's much easier and his stamina drains less and his powers are amplified way more. At this point he's using maybe 3% of One For All, as with his stream envisioning of One For All, he's not activating it in anything really except his right hand. But he definitely feels that there's a strain on his body much less than it would have been in the original timeline. He has no drawbacks from using One For All, but as Deku's intelligence is a little bit lower than the original due to his brute strength and his ability, he has to take notes of heroes as that's his passion, but school wasn't really his favorite thing, and he always knew he was going to be a hero anyway, and he loved doing that stuff, and he helped people all the time. So, when he tried to put this into practice with intelligence, it really wasn't his thing. He's about as smart as, I'd say, Kaminari from, Electric Dude, Pikachu. Anyway, back to the story. Deku finishes cleaning at the beach in 2 hours. All Might's impressed and tells him that he's doing very well. Then, All Might tells him that he's going to bring him a sparring partner soon. Deku is excited and says that he'll do his best. He then says goodbye to All Might, and All Might drives off in his car. Deku begins to walk home and then thinks about that waterfall that he was envisioning, about the power of One For All that he felt, the energy coursing through him. He looked up and he said this, "In 10 months, I'm going to UA." Then the next day, he walked back to the beach and saw All Might and another person standing there. All Might had brought with one of the big three from UA High. He introduces himself and tells him that his name is Mirio Togeda, and that All Might and Night Eye actually started talking again after All Might told Night Eye about Deku's powers and his ability and who he passed it on to. Night Eye said that he wanted to inspect it himself and that he sent Mirio to inspect if he was worthy. He didn't tell Mirio this, of course, as Mirio doesn't know much about anything about One For All, and he never did at this point. Then, Mirio and Deku square up. Deku immediately goes into his fighting stance. All Might instructs him to only use One For All and try and activate it. Deku, who isn't really good at turning it on at will at this point without taking time to think about it, is immediately then rushed by Mirio. Though Deku has an actual speed advantage over Mirio. Deku uses his normal quirk and he actually boosts around Mirio. Mirio is shocked at how fast and strong this kid is. Anytime he moves, a wake of dust is left in his path. Mirio then shoots out of the ground, and Deku turns around and back slaps Mirio with the back of his hand. Mirio curls up, spit out of his mouth, and then falls into the rubble. He then disappears using his quirk of permeation, and then goes right behind Deku, punching him in the back. Deku falls over, then he stands up again and turns toward Mirio. Mirio's breathing hard at this point, and Deku's breathing a little bit easy. A drop of sweat drops down of Deku's face. Then they begin. Mirio rushes forward, and Deku and Mirio begin having hand-to-hand combat. Every time Deku throws a punch, Mirio permeates through it and then punches Deku. Deku's stamina durability is actually wearing down. Then, Deku smiles. He tells him that it's time. Then, he activates it. He activates his Juggernaut shield, a special ability of his quirk besides his strength and speed and durability amp that gives him a mystical force field. Though, he's never shown anyone this power before. He thinks of it as his ultimate move. In fact, he was trying to use it on the sludge villain before when I tried to attack him, but he didn't really need it. Then, Mirio's shocked, as his punch and permeation can't go through it. He tries to do it again. He tries to permeate into the shield. It doesn't work. There's some sort of electrical, smaller than atom energy field. This mystical field actually pushes Mirio back. Mirio realizes what he has to do. He can only evade. He waits until the shield runs out. Deku, running at him at full speed, begins barreling down like a football player. He dives towards Mirio. Mirio can't permeate out of the way, and the shield force field in front of Deku actually hits him before he can think of doing it. Mirio falls backwards and then gets up. He says that it's time. He cracks his neck and says, "Alright, let's get serious." He then uses all of his power and starts using his ultimate move, the Phantom Punch thing. I'll put it on screen. I don't remember the name right now, but yes. He then begins attacking Deku and actually getting some hits in. Deku is wearing down at this point, and All Might's impressed at his durability and stamina. Then, he actually gets it. He activates One For All in his right foot, and then swings it, and it goes blitzing. The air actually creates an air shockwave from his foot that blasts off right as Mirio permeates through it, and slices the garbage pile he made the previous day in half as it falls down into itself. Then, All Might says that's enough for today and tells him to stop. He tells him that they'll train like this every day until each of them become much stronger. They agree. 10 months later, Deku has been training with Mirio as well as some other people, like the other big three who've come to inspect what Mirio's been doing during the past 10 months after schools and stuff. Then, Deku walks up to his UA entrance exam. He was thinking about how he's going to do it when suddenly he realized this. There's a written exam. Deku's eyes drop as he realizes, oh my god, I didn't study for the written exam. He doesn't know if he's actually smart enough to get in on brains alone. On brains. But he knows if he can get number 1 in the physical exam, then he'll definitely get in. So he tries his best, and let's be frank, he gets like a 65 on his normal UA exam, which is like a lot less than his original. He felt not confident about it at all, and definitely feels like he failed. Then, he begins his physical exam. Bakugo actually runs into him and sees him sitting in the hallway. He has to take up 2 seats because he's so big. Uraraka didn't even approach Deku because of how big and scary looking he was. Deku didn't fall over either though, since he was just not thinking about it. He wasn't nervous about anything, he knew that he'd get in. Then, Bakugo looks at him and says, "You know you're gonna get in, Deku. It doesn't matter, but just you wait. Once I get into the best class heroes course, and I start training, I'm gonna get so strong I'll break through your stupid shield durability and strength. I don't give a crap." Then, Deku immediately says, "Then I'll just have to get even stronger." They walk their separate ways, and Deku walks into his exam. He sees Ida there. Ida begins to approach him, but then decides not to. He walks backwards, thinking that that's probably not a good idea. Immediately, the test starts. Deku activates One For All Food Cowling. He activates it along with his quirk, and blitz crashes through the crowd of people. He gets through them and then realizes that he left some people on the ground and runs back and helps them up. He then rushes forward and blitzes past Ida, completely smashing a robot. At this point, All Might's instructing him that he should use no more than 15% of One For All in his entire body. See, during the 10 months, All Might figured out that Deku was having problems with controlling it because his body was strong enough to contain all of One For All in one part of his body. However, he wasn't getting a boost, and took much longer to adjust the power into all of his limbs. So they took a trip to Gran Torino during that 10-month period, and Gran Torino tried to fight with this big brute and figured out what was going on. Then that's where Deku figured out that the fish in the microwave, and he used that instead of his waterfall, to the point where he now has a decent control of full cowling. Deku comes blitzing through the crowds of robots, smashing, bits of robot flying everywhere as a blur of red, as he's wearing a red tracksuit, blitzes through the city. He completely destroys about 51-point monsters, 10 2-point monsters, and 6 3-point monsters. He's doing extremely well, and all the people watching the exam are impressed. The teachers, including Aizawa, are watching this kid as he's blitzing through. Some of them are asking if they're sure this is a student, and he's going so fast that some of the students actually haven't seen a villain yet, like a villain robot. Then they activate just as he walks onto the street. He hears a girl screaming. He sees a girl with brown hair under some rubble with a giant robot that makes even him look small, comes climbing out of the ground. He immediately knows what he has to do. He activates One For All and says, "Sorry, All Might, but I need to do this." He then turns One For All up to 50%, almost triple of what he'd been using at that point. He then jumps. A wave of air just shoots behind him, shattering all the windows that was in the buildings behind him. He moves forward at such speeds that he actually slams into the robot before he can get a hold of himself. He then cocks his right fist back, and then with all of his might, he screams, "Juggernaut Blaster!" He blasts with his mystical force field combined with One For All, just in his fist in front of him, and the entire robot gets completely destroyed. A hole of air just gets pushed. It doesn't just dent the robot, it goes directly through it. The robot falls backwards and is immediately destroyed. Everyone in the office is amazed at this kid's power. How he just took out perhaps like a 200-tall robot, and his speed is incredible. Deku then begins to fall to the ground. He realizes he might fall, but he thinks he'll be okay, when suddenly he gets slapped in the face, and then he begins to float. Uraraka didn't expect him to be so heavy and immediately drops him and starts vomiting. Then Deku thanks her and says thanks for helping, and that she hopes that she's alright. He then walks away and gets home, preparing for the answers to his exam. So last time Deku fought off the 0-point robot and absolutely demolished it. Uraraka was impressed with him, and he got hit and he fell to the ground, and he recovered, and he didn't break any bones or anything, since One For All at like 100% won't affect his body due to him being way stronger than All Might was when he got it. Then Deku goes home and is waiting for the results for UA. The next week, the results come in and that Deku got first place on the actual exam. His practical exam was incredibly high, to the point where it broke records for the most UA records in history so far, even higher than All Might's. Bakugo got second place, which ticks him off while he's looking into it. Then they tell Deku about his score for the non-practical test of the exam. He got a 60 out of 100. He basically failed the entire math, science, and less physical part of the exam. But he did so amazing with physical and fighting off the robots that he got in as first place. So that just gives you an idea of how many robots he took out. Over like 200 points. Then Deku's clapping and sweating, thinking that he barely got in due to his non-practical exam. They explain to him that he got in and that he'll be part of Class 1A. Once he hears this message from All Might and it shuts off, he tells his mom, and his mom is very proud of him. They begin discussing hero costumes. At this point, Deku begins drawing up ideas, and Deku's hero costume is going to look like Juggernaut's costume from the comics. I'll have that as the thumbnail, by the way. So you guys can see that, and that'll be what Deku's costume looks like as a hero costume. So I think that's kind of cool, and I hope you guys like that. Deku, I'm just going to call him Deku, by the way. Deku then smiles and tells his mom thanks for supporting him. The next day at UA, Deku walks into class and sees Ida and Bakugo arguing. Uraraka comes up behind him and then waves and says hello to him, and says that he was that big strong guy who took out that huge robot with one punch, right? Deku puts his hand behind his head and smiles awkwardly, not knowing really how to talk to girls. He says yeah, that was him, and that he's sorry if he got in the way. She laughed and said no, that he saved her, and that was really cool. Then Aizawa comes rolling into the room and says that if you didn't want to come to learn, then you better go, because socializing isn't acceptable in my class. Aizawa gets out of his bag and then proceeds to tell the class that they're not going to orientation. Jiro, Kaminari, and everyone else in the class both look at each other and then are shocked. They look back and say that they're going to miss orientation. Aizawa smiles and says if you really want to be a hero, then you don't have to go to that stupid celebratory stuff. He then tells them to put on these gym uniforms and walk outside. When he says that, Deku, who's standing at about 7'3" right now, looks down on Aizawa and then raises his hand softly. He looks down at the tiny shirt and says, "Sir, I don't think this will fit me." Aizawa looks up to the giant Deku and then looks down, up and down. He tells him that you can just wear your normal clothes. Deku breathes out a sigh of relief as he didn't want to put on that size of clothing. Everyone else looks up to this huge dude, and even the Ojiro and Dark Shadow are impressed with him. They all walk outside, and Bakugo's cursing his luck that he got in the same class as Deku, who was always stronger than him when they were kids. Since Deku got the first place on the practical exam, and on the exam, Aizawa has him throw the ball. He asked Aizawa how hard he wants him to throw it. He says, obviously, as hard as you can, otherwise you might not pass, and I might have to fail you. Deku smiles and says, all right. He then pulls the ball back. As he pulls the ball backwards, he looks into the sky and activates One for All in his right hand. As he throws it, he puts every ounce of strength that he can muster with both his quirk times the One for All boost from it. As he does this, the ball immediately begins to turn red hot. As he chucks the ball, it breaks the sound barrier and it shoots out of the atmosphere, floating into space. He gets an infinite score as he actually broke the ball's atmosphere out of the planet, and it's gone. Aizawa is extremely impressed with this guy's quirk, and everyone in class is amazed. Uraraka is the only person to tie with Deku in that exam. Deku then completely crushes the hand strength exam, where he breaks the actual machine with just a little bit of his power. The last measure was over 1,000 kilograms of force, which everyone is shocked at how ridiculously strong the guy is. Deku, thinking that he's embarrassing himself, is continually still embarrassed and is apologizing to everyone for breaking everything. When it comes to the 50-meter dash, Deku versus Ida, Deku takes one jump. He leaps like a long jump, and then basically bursts past Ida through the race and gets there in about 0.5 seconds. With a long jump, when Deku jumps, he flies just like All Might and goes across the field, almost to the other end of the school. He waves over to Aizawa, and Aizawa tells him he won that one too. At the end of everything, he sees a ton of potential in Deku and everyone in the class. No one's expelled due to, needing even teams. And Deku smiles and says that he just tried his best. Bakugo at this point is raging and his face is turning red as he's looking towards his rival. He then points his finger at Deku and says that no matter what, he's going to surpass him, and he's going to beat him until he tells him that he is the better hero. Deku looks towards Bakugo and smiles and says that he's got to hurry then, because I don't know if Bakugo can ever get as strong as him. This makes Bakugo rage as he stomps off. Uraraka and Ida walk home with Deku that day, and they're impressed with him. The next day, they all go back to school, and Deku and All Might comes crashing into the room. All Might comes in and sees everyone, and then he explains to them about the test for the heroes versus villains test. Deku puts on his costume and walks out, just like everyone else. When All Might sees Deku with his giant metal helmet and bright red suit, he then asks Deku what is he. He tells Deku that the clothes fit the pros, and this is proof. Deku walks out, and then the teams are decided. It turns out Bakugo and Ida will be versus Team Deku and Uraraka. Ida and Bakugo look towards each other and then towards Deku. Deku pounds his fists together and looks into their eyes. A spark ignited in his. He tells them to try his best, and they head off to their areas. Last time, Deku and Bakugo stare each other down as they realize that their fight will be the first one. All Might smiles as he sees Deku and Bakugo's fire in their eyes to fight each other. Uraraka sees Deku and thinks that she's going to win this easily. She smiles and pumps her fist up in the air knowing that she's going to win. Then, they all get into their positions. The rest of the class goes up into the building to watch the battle. As Todoroki eyes Deku, he can see how much power he's holding behind his fists. All Might can even tell at this point that since Deku can use 100% of One for All, he's far, far stronger than him. So he tells Deku to hold back when he's fighting against Bakugo and Ida so that he doesn't kill them. Deku agrees and tells All Might that he'll do his best. They then walk into the exam, and they get into the building. Bakugo and Ida are standing up into the bomb room, and Bakugo tells Ida to watch every single move of Deku. He tells Ida he's never won against Deku in a fight, but he's going to still try to win this one. He looks towards Ida and tells him that if he comes toward you at full speed, I don't know if even your speed will be able to outmatch him. And for some reason, he's gotten even stronger, so watch out for him. Hopefully we can take him out using the trap, and since he's not too smart. So him and Ida actually stick together to come up with a plan to try and trap Deku. Deku goes charging into the building and bursts through the wall, causing a heap of rubble to explode through the building. As he jumps in, he has his arms on his side and says that he's there to end those villains. Uraraka tells him that they should probably be a little more quieter, and then Deku looks down and says sorry. He then tries to sneakily walk through the room with Uraraka, each step of his foot creating a pounding sound to the building, even though he's walking as gently as he possibly can. Once they finally get to the stairs, which leads directly up to the room where Ida and Bakugo are, then Deku notices something. Uraraka notices it just a few seconds before Deku and tells him to watch out. Suddenly, a string comes launching out of the way, and Bakugo is being pulled from it. This gives Bakugo an extreme speed boost, as they realize that Ida had been pulling the string, which was attached to Bakugo, and had run at full speed to give Bakugo a speed advantage. Bakugo then takes his left gauntlet, which he's been charging up at this point, sweating profusely to try and get up to max power, then launches the full power explosive attack into the side of Deku's head while he's unprepared. Deku goes flying and then stands up after he's crashed through the rubble of the wall. Bakugo is actually shocked and is horrified that Deku's still awake. He tells Ida to run and they try and get away. Deku stands up and then wipes blood off a scratch on his cheek. He looks towards Bakugo and tells him it's not nice to play with fire inside of a building. He then tells Uraraka to get the bomb. He then rushes at full speed and turns on 10% of One For All. With his 10% boost, he easily catches up to Ida and Bakugo, red electricity coursing along his body. As he looks towards Bakugo, he then looks up and down and says that wasn't very nice. He then swats his right hand towards Bakugo and Ida, whose eyes open wide as they go flying into the wall. Ida's knocked out and Bakugo's barely able to stand up. Bakugo begins throwing explosions as hard as he can towards Deku, dodging or blocking each of these attacks. Once Deku finally takes Bakugo by the head, he picks him up and then slams him into the ground with as little powers he can muster. Bakugo's knocked out and a few of his bones are broken. All Might says the fight's over and that the heroes won overwhelmingly. Deku probably could have single-handedly done the entire test by himself. In fact, Uraraka had just gotten to the bomb by the time Deku had broken the two villains. The rest of the test goes normal, and Todoroki's keeping an eye on Deku, as him and All Might have very similar characteristic builds and such, which makes him think that All Might is his father even more than ever before. Then, suddenly, the next day, after the exams are over, they all know that Deku was the MVP due to his strength and being able to overpower in such a short amount of time. Todoroki coming in a close second. Then, Mr. Aizawa just tells him about the new trip that they're taking towards the USJ. Deku is excited, and he and everyone else is pretty happy to go. When Deku goes with the rest of the class to the USJ, he walks in the door, and 13 actually thinks that he's one of the teachers because he's just so much bigger than everyone else there, including Aizawa. Aizawa tells her that he's one of the students and that everything. So once she nods, and then they all look towards when suddenly a black portal begins to appear on the horizon. The black portal opens down below, and suddenly Kurogiri and the rest of the villains come out. As Nomu walks out of the portal, the Nomu and Deku lock eyes for a second. Tomoro Shigaraki sees Deku, and then the Nomu sees Deku, and they make eye contact. As the rest of the students cower in fear, Deku walks forward. He then tells Mr. Aizawa that he can handle this. Aizawa, who knows how strong Deku is, but can't let the student get hurt, tells him to hold back. He then begins to charge down. As Mr. Aizawa is charging down, Deku suddenly appears in front of him and tells him that he's gonna help them with this. Aizawa nods and lets Deku in on the fight. He tells him gives him permission to help him defeat the villains. Ida escapes with Bakugo and Kirishima's help from Kurogiri, and Ida runs back towards the school, trying to let everyone know, all the heroes know what's going on. Deku immediately begins helping Aizawa fight the villains. Deku then pulls his fist back and says, Juggernaut tackle. He then, with both of his pullback, charges forward and takes out 10 villains, smashing them into the side wall of the USJ. All of them mushed together in a big puddle of bodies. They're not dead, by the way. He then runs back towards the other villains and begins punching them. Some of them actually, like, their arms getting ripped off and such. Aizawa tells them to go easy, they can't kill them. Deku says he's sorry, and then he tones down his power. Then Tomar, seeing that his villains are being deleted by this guy, tells Nomu to go after him. Suddenly, Deku, for the first time in his life ever, feels pain. The Nomu punches Deku, and he actually coughs up blood. He looks at the Nomu, and his eyes are wide. He then tells Mr. Aizawa that he needs to go all out for this guy. Aizawa, seeing that he actually did damage to Deku, nods and tells him to do what he has to. Then Tomar Shigaraki begins to attack Mr. Aizawa. While Aizawa and Shigaraki go hand for hand blow, he gets a hand on Aizawa's scarf, which then evaporates into dust. Aizawa is trying to avoid his hands and using his quirk to deactivate him so he can get in closer and use hand-to-hand combat attacks. While this is going on, suddenly a wind begins to pick up in the room. Deku's eyes close and his hair begins to flow wildly in the wind. He activates One for All to 50% and suddenly a glow emanates from his body. His muscles become more buffed and toned. As he looks up, he looks at the Nomu and says he's going to finish this in one blow. As the Nomu begins charging towards him at full speed, Deku, rushes towards the Nomu and pulls his right wrist back. He then rushes forward and says, "Detroit, smash!" He punches the Nomu into the ground and, creating a tornado, slams the Nomu 3 feet underground and it causes a crater to explode through the USJ. This crater is about 20 feet wide in diameter. As this crater hits the ground, wind begins to pulse through the USJ. Suddenly, at this point, All Might comes crashing into the room. As Tsuyu and Mineta escape from the water using Tsuyu's faster swimming skills. Then, Deku is still fighting the Nomu. The Nomu had regenerated from his attack, and he's going blow for blow. All Might sees his student fighting this huge black creature, which is almost as big as Deku himself. Deku and the Nomu are gripping hands now, and then Deku picks up the Nomu and begins to swing it and spin it. He then tells All Might that he's got this and tells him to go help the other students. Deku throws the Nomu into the air and then jumps up towards it. He then pulls his left fist and right fist and begins punching it as fast as he can. Each blow harder. He then says he's gonna go beyond plus ultra. He activates his One for All to 100%. As his entire body glows, his hair flows upward as 100% Deku Juggernaut goes. The red electricity flowing across his body creates a suit of red across him, creating a helmet of energy through his hair. He then slams into the Nomu with every ounce of power he can to the fist, causing the Nomu to burst into atoms as it erupts out of the USJ, creating a huge hole in this building. This causes all the students to see a huge shine of light, of black light, as the Nomu rockets out of the stadium and into the atmosphere into space. Deku falls to the ground, and then his muscles begin shaking, as he had done like anaerobic exercise pretty much. He worked himself too hard, as he used 100% of One for All, which even for him was a lot. He then falls down and lays on the ground. Shigaraki, noticing this, begins to run towards Deku. Aizawa, who was still fighting him, turns off his quirk, and All Might rushes in front and takes Tomura and punches him. Tomura goes flying across the stage area, where Kurogiri comes to rescue him. Kurogiri and Shigaraki escape, and he tells All Might that he'll be back for him next time, and his little protege too, while he looks at Deku. All Might's concerned about this when suddenly he begins to smoke, as he had used too much power when he was saving the other students. Cementos and everyone comes in just in time and saves All Might from his reveal. Then everyone goes back and the USJ incident is over. So last time we covered that All Might was smoking down after the battle with Nomu and protecting the students, and Deku was pretty much wiped out after he had used basically all of his quirk of Juggernaut mixed with One for All. He quickly recovers, however, though, as this mystic healing force field of his is actually beginning to reinforce him, and he heals back up pretty quickly. All Might's impressed with this healing factor, and then thinks that One for All must have even boosted that aspect of his quirk as well. Then, Deku helps block All Might from the rest of the students as he knows what's going on. He basically just stands in front of them. They can't really see All Might behind Deku, as, like we've covered, Deku is bigger than All Might at this point in the series. All Might then shrinks back to his normal size, and the students who think that they're okay head back up to 13 to see if she's alright. The police come and question all the students, as well as considering the teachers and asking what happened with the League of Villains. All Might has Deku explain what happened and how he defeated the Nomu and where he had sent him. Deku explained that he believed the Nomu was out in space and that he didn't believe that there was anything he could do to get it back, unfortunately. He said this with a straight face, which caused them all to be shocked, as the amount of power needed to access the stratosphere and beyond that is immense. All Might is smiling at this point, but it does pain him to see that the evidence that they had of the League of Villains and what they were doing as a lead was lost. They did, however, still have the blood from Tomoshigaraki that was on the ground. So all of the police officers ran in and took that sample, as well as was scanning for fingerprints across the entire USJ. Deku and the rest of everyone in Class 1A take a break for the week when everyone gets back the next week. Deku and his mom had pretty much spent the whole week watching movies and old superhero movies. Once Naruto, once Deku got back to class, he then was informed by Mr. Aizawa, who came back and wrapped in bandages, which terrified everyone, that the UA Sports Festival would still be held. Everyone then, while having a cold sweat down their face, turns and stares at Deku, who is a monster in their class and is definitely hero level, if not top hero level. Todoroki thinks this is a good challenge to test his theory of if Deku is actually All Might's son, a legitimate son at that. And so Todoroki challenges Deku and tells him that he's going to win and defeat him in the sport festival. Baku then scoffs and tells Todoroki that that's his rival and that if he wants to fight him, then he's got to get in the back of the line. Baku and Todoroki actually have a little fight over this if cold dead stares, and then Baku gives up and goes all rage mode again. Deku shakes his head back and forth and looks at the two of them and tells them that he'll fight both of them at once if they really want to fight him. They then all begin training for the UA Sports Festival. Deku trains as well, but training at this point for him actually doesn't do much. It's unfortunate, but all he can really do is maintain, as his quirk has just gotten too strong for his body. As after the fight with Inomu, he had noticed that on his skin, it began to turn red and have some sort of energy beginning to actually push out of his body. He had gone to the doctor about this with his mom, and the doctor had told him that if he had kept growing his quirk, then his power might actually get so strong that it could not be contained in that body anymore. So Deku is basically so strong at this point because of Juggernaut's strength and energy, as well as combined with the boost from One For All, that his body, which is massive and huge, and pretty much the apex of human bodybuilders of any kind, is unstable at the moment. Deku then begins to have an idea, a figment of an idea of how he could fix this problem. So, anyway, let's get back to the UA Sports Festival. The UA Sports Festival begins, and as everyone gets into their gym uniforms, Deku again asks if there was a bigger size for him, as his last gym uniform that he'd been wearing during the attack when they were fighting at the USJ had been ripped, as he had been wearing that gym uniform since his normal costume had been burned by Bakugo's explosions. Aizawa loans him a very large one that's for an adult size, like All Might, and it fits perfectly. He then thanks Aizawa and they get back onto the stage. As Deku and everyone gets ready, the buzzer goes off. Immediately, a blast of wind immediately causes the rest of the competition to fall backwards on their face, Todoroki included as well as Bakugo, as they see just a jet of red leap forward as energy and electricity sparkle off of him. Deku's smiling as he keeps running and jumping, seeing each robot and punching it, destroying it in one hit, vaporizing pretty much most of the course actually. The rest of the students are scared and hanging lack-jawed, and they all run after the now sprinting Deku. Deku continues running, and Todoroki and Bakugo decide that they won't let him win. They actually use kind of a team thing. Todoroki uses ice to speed his running up, while Bakugo uses explosions to skid across the ice, which pushes both of them forward, and they get about maybe 50 meters behind Deku. Deku senses that they're there and turns around and then says, "Sorry about this, but time to use my secret move." He puts his hand out forward and uses his Juggernaut shield. The shield of mystic energy then forms behind him, and it forms a great wall of energy. As soon as Bakugo and Todoroki can't see this, and as they keep going, they slam into the wall at full speed. Their faces smush into the wall, and Deku laughs and keeps running. Deku then finally crosses the finish field and deactivates the barrier, and a wave of students comes following through. Afterwards, and everyone knows that Deku has 1,000,000 points, basically everyone's asking Deku if they can join his team, since Deku is really strong as well as fast and pretty much good at everything besides, well, his test scores. Let's not talk about his grades, they're not so good. Deku and Yaoyorozu basically don't like each other, as they're quite the opposite in their strengths and weaknesses. Deku, however, decides that he'll team up with Dark Shadow, Tomoyaki, as well as Tenya Ida, who actually wants to be on his team this time, because he doesn't want to even think about challenging him at speed after seeing that. And his team consists of Dark Shadow Uraraka, Ida, as well as he finds another person. He looks for her and actually finds her, Invisible Girl. As Invisible Girl gets on, she actually made it here, and he has her use her invisibility for something interesting for once. As Deku can create an invisible wall as a shield, and Invisible Girl's invisible, she can basically use the wall to climb over and then hit people while being on top of this wall. So while they're moving around, Dark Shadow's defending their rear hide. Deku is on the bottom, and Ida is on their top as holding all the bands. They then just speed around, and while Deku creates mystic walls that Invisible Girl is standing on top of and then jumping down and while holding onto the wall and kicking people. This actually works out very well until Deku runs into Todoroki. Todoroki uses his ice wall and begins to slam into the Invisible Girl as well as Ida and their entire team. Deku then kicks his left leg out and then slams it forward at a fast rate. As he does this 3 times in a row, a big push of air actually squeezes out and completely shatters the ice, blasting Todoroki's team backwards. Deku's team comes in the win with the highest score of the entire exam. And now comes the best arc of the tournament arc, for some people's opinion. The tournament arc for the fights. So the fights are going to stay the same, as luck doesn't really change based on Deku being the Juggernaut, and neither would the draw. So Deku fights Shinso, and Shinso actually gets a jump on him. Yeah, you were not expecting that, probably. Shinso, who has mind control abilities, as soon as he uses his questioning thing, it actually locks Deku underneath it. And then he tells Deku to jump off stage. As he says this, though, Deku jumps off of the stage into the air and then falls back to the ground. Deku then looks at Shinso and then realizes that he's being mind controlled. His mystic energy and his Juggernaut powers, as well as his One for All vestiges, awaken him all at once, causing a big burst of air, as well as his hand to hurt. He then rushes forward and then lightly flicks Shinso, sending him back into the wall as he falls to the ground unconscious. This was probably the funniest match of the entire arc, if in this timeline. Everyone continues on with what they were doing until the fight between Deku and Todoroki. Todoroki looks into Deku's eyes and tells him that he knows that he's related to All Might. He has to be. That body, that strength, that power. He then uses all of the stops. He pulls ice as well as fire, knowing that if he doesn't use his flames, he'll never win, and he'll never prove that he can be better than All Might. As he does this, however, the flame and ice begin to melt around Deku, as Deku uses his shield and just puts his hand out, blocking all of it. He tells Todoroki his flames and ice will have to be much colder as well as hotter in order to burn or freeze through this. Todoroki pushes as hard as he can, using every ounce of strength he can muster. At that point, he just sputters out, and Deku walks forward sadly and gives him a hug in front of everyone on stage, including his dad. His dad screams Shoto at this point after the flames and then sits back down. Todoroki then looks up at Deku and tells him that this isn't supposed to happen. He lightly punches him in the abs, which actually doesn't really do anything. Deku tells him that he understands his pain about having a quirk like that. He tells him that it's okay and that isn't, like, it's not his dad's quirk, it's his own. And that even if you were trying to beat me, you can still be friends. Then Deku lightly pushes Todoroki as he flings backwards and falls out of the stadium. At that point, the next match is Bakugo versus Dark Shadow. He then basically wins using his explosions as light, and it goes the same as the original. Bakugo versus Deku then occurs. Deku fights Bakugo and lowers himself to a degree to where it's actually sort of an interesting fight, as all of his fights have been one punch at this point, and yeah, he was kind of done with that. So he lowered himself to about 5% of his strength at that time, and decided to actually try and fight Bakugo with some more strategies and less just brute force. Bakugo wasn't expecting him to do that at all, because Deku is usually going in all with 100% all the way most of the time. As Bakugo blitzes in with his main attack, the Blitzhammer Spin, he then launches it at Deku, whose face actually gets burned as he wasn't expecting this attack up front. Deku then, who has ash in his eyes, begins to swat at Bakugo, his large hands clapping the side of Bakugo's head. Bakugo goes flinging across the arena, causing several stone holes in the arena. Bakugo gets up and begins blasting his way towards Deku, slamming into his arm, explosion after explosion after explosion, until he falls. Bakugo looks up and tells Deku that he'll never let him win. He then continues fighting against Deku for another 10 minutes, the audience staring in horror and shock and amazement at Bakugo's perseverance. Deku then, with one good chop to the shoulder, causes Bakugo to go underground to where his head's sticking above the concrete, and he's knocked out. Deku's acclaimed the winner of the entire sports festival by a landslide, and All Might's extremely proud of his student, if not a little scared of what he's just accomplished. The League of Villains is heavily looking into this now, and actually, one of their main people are considering calling in that man. As a quick recap of what happened last time, Deku had absolutely destroyed Bakugo in combat, as he had literally shoved him into the concrete of the ground like a vegetable and then pulled him back up again. Bakugo was now sitting in a comfortable second place, as now we see that Deku has taken the victory out of under his rug. Now, Bakugo is pretty angry about this, but it's not anything new to him, as ever since they had been younger, Deku, whose quirk had made him physically superior, had always been the winning at things, so Bakugo's a bit more humble in this timeline than he was in the original. Anyway, getting back to the story now, Deku, as he now has finished the sports festival in first place, has many offers to come and join their work study. Deku is also offered to have a work study with someone who All Might had told him was named Gran Torino. Gran Torino would be interested in meeting Deku as the new user of One For All, as Deku in this timeline would have One For All along with his main quirk Juggernaut. Deku would get on the train as he takes up 5 seats all by himself, with many people having to stand as they don't want to get in front of his way. He would wave goodbye to Ida, as well as the rest of his friends as he goes on his way. A few days before that, Deku had been talking with Ida and Uraraka as they had finally finished the sports festival. Ida had this look in his eyes that seemed darker than usual, as if though something had gone very wrong. Deku would think that he was thinking about how he had lost in the sports festival, and he would pat Ida on the back rather hard as Ida goes into the ground a little, as he tells him to cheer up and that he can always try to win next year. Ida would look over and give a faint smile as he then says he'll see Deku and Uraraka after the training with the work studies would be over. As he walks away, Deku would go off, not realizing anything was wrong. Uraraka would go to Death Gun's training, as well as everyone would go to their regular, as in the original. Bakugo, when he meets with Best Jeanist, however, wouldn't have to deal with the hair treatment, as, however, he is still hot-headed in this timeline. He doesn't think that he's better than everyone else, as he's been defeated by Deku numerous times. Now, back to Deku. Deku has finally made it to Gran Torino's area. As he walks into the front door, he sees that the place is in complete disarray. There's pizza boxes on the floor, and the fridge is left open. He quickly rushes over and closes the fridge, as he sees Gran Torino laying on the ground with what appears to be blood leaking out of him. Ah! Deku would say as he rushes over to check if Gran Torino's alright, and he then thinks that he's dead. Gran Torino would look up and say, "Just kidding," as he wipes the ketchup off of himself. Deku would sigh as he thinks that this man might be senile, as he looks so old. Deku would then introduce himself to Gran Torino as he says that his name is Izuku Midoriya. He would outstretch his hand as he tries to give it to Gran Torino to shake. Gran Torino takes his own small hand and puts it on Deku's palm, saying that he's a rather large one, isn't he? Deku would wonder what this means as Gran Torino suddenly starts flying around the walls and begins to get into his serious mode, asking if he truly knows he can master One for All in that large body of his. As Gran Torino comes flying down on top of Deku and strikes him with a kick, Deku doesn't even move as he turns around, grabbing Gran Torino's leg and holding him there still. He then tells Gran Torino that even if he had used One for All, he probably could have hurt him too much, and that he only uses that ability whenever he's in desperate need of power, which he hasn't been in so far. He would then look at Gran Torino as Gran Torino is breathing heavy, seeing how strong this kid is. He decides that he's going to have to teach this kid how to focus on controlling his power, as if he would let it go rampant, he truly would be a Juggernaut, just ripping through people. This is when they begin training on how Deku can lower the percentage of output of Juggernaut as well as One for All. Gran Torino would explain how One for All, and the way, at least from what he knows, is similar to keeping a glass of water at the maximum output to the very top of the glass, without having it overflow too much or the glass crack. Deku tries to understand this as he thinks about it for a second. He sits on the ground, sits very still as he taps into his power. Deep inside of him, he opens up One for All as the gates flood open to the rest of his body. Suddenly, a red energy begins to surround Deku, as the greens and red sparks around his body are from that of One for All, of his spirit, and that of the red energy of his Juggernaut quirk. As the two quirks begin to power each other up, Deku can feel that his body has just been incredibly strengthened. He envisions the glass of water as he tries to keep the water inside of the glass and continuously spins it around. As he does this, as the water stays within the glass, he tries to charge One for All across throughout his body and lowering the percentage. He imagines taking the water and gently pulling some of it out as he drips it into a sink and lets it flow off into the ocean. As Deku allows the power to wane for a little bit, he notices immediately as his body begins to shrink in size. Deku's body begins to shrink down as it goes to that of the normal Deku we see in the show. Deku has completely turned off his mutation and One for All quirks now. Gran Torino opens his eyes and sees that Deku is shrunk now, and is completely surprised as well as Deku at this new ability that he's found. Deku had Juggernaut activated ever since it had started when he had first obtained the quirk, so he had never actually seen what his true body looks like without the effects of the quirk on it. Deku himself now realizes that he can use each of the quirks at will on their own, or use them together. He'd practice this for the next few days of Gran Torino, as he would continuously practice trying to make his body different sizes using Juggernaut and One for All. As he uses his power, he'd make his body, using Juggernaut, slightly bigger as well as a little bit more agile than what he would be at his full power of just using Juggernauts. This combined with One for All allows him to be more acrobatic as he tries to dodge and weave away from Gran Torino's attacks. After sweating for a while, he finally buffs back up into his main form, not being able to hold back as he had been doing before. He relaxes now as he realizes that what he had been doing is he had been concentrating on restraining his quirk rather than on lowering it. He works more on this restraining and lowering of the power in his quirks as he begins to gain more control over them. This is when Gran Torino decide that they need to head over to Hosu City to do some scouting, as he has to do some actual hero work. As Deku and Gran Torino are on the train, Deku uses his ability of now containing his power with One for All as a sort of gate, as he locks it up and lets himself be smaller, which puts him in a much more easier way of getting around. As Deku gets on the train and sits across from Gran Torino, suddenly he sees something. Out the window, a flying shape comes hurtling into the train, as a large crack of metal, an explosion as shards of shrapnel go flying throughout the train. Deku quickly would increase the size of his body mass as he releases all of the power of Juggernaut to go to his maximum form. As he uses this, he blocks the way so that no shrapnel can get into any of the citizens, as he uses his body as a shield. Gran Torino would activate his quirk as wind begins to push out of his feet. He shoots forward as a sound of air goes flying through the train, as he tackles a Nomu and goes flying out of the train itself. Deku would hold everyone back as he sees Gran Torino fighting with it, knowing that he can take care of himself. Deku would lead the train as it gets out to the station, where he helps everyone escape to safety. Deku would then get out of the train as he decides he has to catch up with Gran Torino. He quickly heightens his body mass and strength, as well as accesses 5% of One for All to increase his speed. He jumps into the air as he flies up onto the top of a building. As he lands, a soft crunch of stone beneath his feet echo. Him now in his hero costume, as he has the red costume with the metal iron helmet that he always wears, combined now. As he jumps from rooftop to rooftop, looking through each alleyway to see where Gran Torino could have gone, or where even Ida or the killer Stain could be, as he had heard that he had been missing. Now thinking about what what had happened to his brother Ingenium, then he knew that he might have come to Hosu just to find him. As Deku would fly over one of the buildings, he would see a streak of red beneath, as he then quickly changes adjustments in midair and uses the strength of One For All to shoot a pulse of wind behind him. He goes flying into the ground as a large crash of dust and rocks go flying everywhere. He stands just in front as the sword is about to pierce into Ida and kill him and finish him off. Deku would grab the sword and shatter it with his bare hands as he looks into the Killer Stain's eyes. He would then tell Ida that he's here to save him and that they're going to get out of there. He is prepared to grab Ida as well as the other hero on the ground and run away. As he does so, grabbing the two and rushing out of the alleys, he throws them off into another corner so they can hide. He would then turn around just in time to see a blade coming towards his face, as he whacks it with his hands, throwing it out of its course, going out of the way. Stain would think that this guy is incredibly strong, almost to the degree of All Might, as you can see his body and muscle mass. Deku would begin to power up, as he tells him that once he gets going, Killer Stain, there's nothing that can stop him. He charges forward as a burst of red energy comes flying from behind him, as he comes rushing forward and punches into Stain, using his magical shield that he's created using psychic waves to push Stain first, as he then crunches over him with a body with a tackle. Stain goes flying back as he's crushed into the ground by Deku's overwhelming weight. Stain would begin coughing as he begins to try and get any blood to paralyze Deku so he can escape, or at least kill the other two before he leaves. He would inevitably get one cut on Deku as he pulls a blade from beneath his cloak and stabs under Deku while he's laying there. As he tries to lick Deku's blood, however, Deku would quickly grab the knife and throw it away, not knowing why he wants to lick his blood. Deku would have seen what had happened with Ida and how he was paralyzed from being licked, his blood licked by Stain. Deku would pick up Stain as he throws him into the air like a rag doll. Stain would go flying up as he feels all of his ligaments begin to bend. Deku would then fly up with one mighty punch as he jabs it directly into Stain's abdomen. Stain coughs up blood as he gets flung into the air as high as possible. Deku would then fall back to the ground as he waits for him to come flying down. Stain would crunch into the ground as a crater beneath him forms, with several of his bones being broken now. Inevitably, Deku would tie up Stain as he waits for him without having any issue. Todoroki would be coming by eventually as he sees now Deku waiting with Ida and this other hero with Stain captured. Todoroki would wonder what happened as Deku explains that he had just taken care of the villain. Ida would sigh, thinking that Midoriya had to save him again, as now Midoriya has been the one to take every victory so far. Ida would then thank Midoriya for coming to his rescue, however, and that was perfect timing. Deku would say it was no big deal, as he realizes he has to go catch up with Gran Torino. He would leave the Killer Stain of Todoroki and Ida, so that way they can report him to one of the custodies. As he walks out, a gray flying Nomu decides to come out of nowhere, as it flies from around a building which Gran Torino is chasing along with Endeavor. It tries to grab onto Deku, and just as it does so, Deku would grab both of its legs and hold it down, as his overwhelming weight was too heavy for the Nomu to carry. Endeavor would tell him to hold still as he creates the flaming arrow spear that he can, and chucks it towards the Nomu, hitting it in the brain, killing it. Deku would drop the villain as he then walks over to Gran Torino and Endeavor. Endeavor would see that this kid, or whatever this hero, is incredibly strong after being able to hold down that creature. He would thank him for his assistance in the battle and ask what his hero name was to thank him. Deku would then take his mask off as he shows that he's actually a high schooler, and that he came here with Gran Torino on a work-study mission. Gran Torino would then see that they had captured the Killer Stain, and Endeavor would get the credit just like in the original. Deku and Ida and Todoroki would be having a talk with the police director chief on how they shouldn't have incorporated themselves in the villain's attacks. Deku would apologize. He says that it was him who had taken out both of them, the Nomu and the Killer Stain, and that the other two, it wasn't their fault. Ida would then say that Todoroki had gotten there after the fight had taken place, so he hadn't done anything wrong. The police chief would sigh and say that he forgives them, and as he bows and thanks them for taking the killer on. He then says that the credit will go to the hero Endeavor, so that way there's no problems with students being involved in the incident. Deku would then return to school after their work studies had been over. As he walks into the classroom now at his normal size. As everyone turns around to see Deku, they are surprised when they see that he's his actual form without having any quirks activated. Bakugo would see this for the first time since he had been a younger child, and is surprised to see Deku not in his hulking massive form. Deku would say he learned a lot of stuff at the work studies, and everyone would be shocked as they say, "No kidding me." Deku would then be sitting down in class as everyone is beginning to get explained about how the final examinations would take place before their summer break.
Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to the future. This last video was from almost 2 years ago now, maybe almost 3. So, thank you and welcome back. Today we'll be finishing the rest of continuing from part 6 of What If Deku Was the Juggernaut to my potential theory on how this would end with the current events in the manga. So, hitting from where we had just left off, which by the way, oh my god, if any of you are from back then, I'm so sorry. I left the series on a Deku versus All Might fight, which is just evil. So, my bad. But let's get into it. Basically, we just ended with the final examinations taking place, and because of Deku's quirk, not much would change in the fact of what teams get picked, because luck is random. And so Deku and Baku will be placed on the same team against All Might, with All Might wanting to test what Deku has learned since his battle and training with Gran Torino. In this version of events, both Bakugo and Deku wouldn't even be thinking of trying to escape to the gate, with Deku punching his own fist, looking over to Kacha and saying, "Let's take him down." Bakugo would laugh, saying he doesn't need to tell him twice, as the two would crack their knuckles and necks. Just imagine the bone crunching sound from Dragon Ball Z, as they begin facing All Might. "Oh, you're coming right at me then, huh? Can't say that's wise, young Midoriya." Bakugo would use his Howitzer Impact, spinning like a top in the air as he thrusts a dual-handed explosion towards All Might's corpse. Or what Bakugo imagines is a corpse as he screams, "Child man!" Deku would take advantage of the smoke, using his massive body and hiding behind it as he pushes off the ground using a bit of One For All combined with Juggernaut. Red sparks would flow over his body as Juggernaut and One For All's combined strength would crack the ground beneath him, the asphalt shattering as he moves forward at blinding speed through Bakugo's smoke. All Might would have more experience though, and he'd easily sense and see the movement in the smoke, turning and throwing a Detroit smash into it. In response, Deku would block with both of his arms, tanking the attack as we see a shockwave of red and yellow sparks clashing against each other, as the shockwaves would shatter the windows all throughout the city. Remember how All Might had moved so fast that he shattered those buildings? Well, in this version of events, it would be from the shockwave of Deku and All Might's fists collapsing into each other. Baku would be gripping onto the ground as he gets blown back, with Deku and All Might's power seemingly being even. Everyone in class would be shocked, Sero saying that he's as strong as All Might, with everyone wondering what happened after their training. Because Deku has been trained to use One For All in correspondence with Juggernaut, for one, he has a control over his size similar to All Might's buff muscle form now, his muscle mass changing based on the output of Juggernaut he uses, meaning he can use his body to harness One For All better. Seeing as he can change his muscle mass and size, he can effectively bulk himself up and use it to contain more of One For All, which allows him to almost use it similar to Fajin from the manga, since he can basically make a Fox 100% combining his own quirk with One For All. Deku would respond after this collateral punch using a kick as he throws his right leg up into the air and smashes his leg into All Might's left arm. All Might would be forced to back away as All Might gets sent spinning into a light post, the lamp getting ripped out of the ground as he then picks it up, using it as a weapon and throwing it, crushing it down on Deku, who'd catch it with both hands. The metal would be creaking and ripping apart as Deku began spinning the light post in his hands. The entire thing ripping in half as Baku then makes it back, using his explosion, trying to do double explosions on All Might and do some damage, not wanting to be left on the sidelines like a side character. All Might would take advantage of this as he throws a punch at Bakugo, not at full strength obviously, landing a gut punch as Bakugo would spit out saliva, getting thrown towards Deku. Deku with one arm would grab Bakugo by the back of his costume, then putting him on the ground as he tells All Might that they should get a little more serious now. Deku would open his eyes turning a deep red, as he harnesses Juggernaut combined with One For All, and red sparks flow over his body, as he uses roughly 30% of One For All combined with his Juggernaut. Deku would cross his arms over his front, making an X-like pattern, as Deku would begin running forward like a lineman, ready to tackle All Might. All Might would hold up both his arms, realizing he can't dodge this, as a powerful burst of wind would be coming off of Deku, as he tackles at full strength into All Might, the two large men toppling through two buildings, as we can already imagine Principal Nezu's face, realizing the amount of damage that this single exam is causing. Deku would come in with a Vermont smash. Using his knees, he dive bombs on top of All Might. Both of them at once would then scream as they're grappling, Detroit Smash. Their fists covered with the power of One For All collapsing once again into each other. The entire city that they're fighting in their mock battle beginning to collapse. Suddenly, as Deku's watching this punch happening, he'd notice steam starting to come off of All Might, as he then lets himself get hit, lowering his strength as the punch would overpower him. All Might realizing what Deku had done, with Midoriya caring more about protecting his master's secret. As he gets sent flying back, he'd run over to where Bakugo is still lying on the ground coughing, picking him up and running at full speed towards the entrance. All Might would begin coughing up blood as smoke begins to cover him, as Deku would turn one last time, throwing a humongous Florida smash. The wind current from his fist blowing All Might into another building as it would begin collapsing on the entrance, blocking the view of the cameras with smoke so that All Might could get out of there before his transformation ended, with Deku protecting the secret of One For All. Deku would have escaped with himself and Bakugo having defeated All Might essentially and passed their final exam, with the students wondering why Deku had ended the fight so early, wondering if maybe All Might had overpowered him and he felt he was running low on strength. Robots would come and get All Might out of the rubble, with him being secretly escorted through a secret exit back to Principal Nezu's office where he can rest and recover after he had been using so much energy in his battle against his protege. The rest of the fights would line up pretty much within canon. The only difference is Bakugo is disappointed in Deku, saying that they definitely could have won, with him not yet knowing about the secret of One For All, for obvious reasons. Since Deku's had a quirk since he was a child, he's not been nearly as nosy about it. Anyway, Deku would then proceed to have finished the final exam, completing with everyone else, as their summer trip would begin to be announced, with everyone being told about their summer training camp, with all of them being sent on a 2-week excursion of fun of being in a forest and working out. And now, let's kick this up a notch. As the students arrive in the forest, this is when they'd get kicked out of the bus around a kilometer away from the campsite. This is when the Kitty Power Patrol Rangers would show up, with the Earth One using her ability to control and manipulate the ground to push all of the students over the cliff into their deaths. Or that's what you'd think they would have done, since all of them survived, but anyway. Everyone would land to the ground safely somehow, I guess, since they're heroes and definitely can't get caught off guard. All of them would land, with them beginning to make their way through the forest and having to fight the stone golems that she can make. Which, by the way, would have been really helpful in the war arc of the anime and manga, but I don't recall her actually doing that. You know, considering how busted an ability to make some artificial army like that would be. But regardless, the heroes would make their way through with Todoroki, Bakugo, and of course Izuku Midoriya leading the pack. Deku, with using his Juggernaut and One For All abilities, would have no trouble just wailing his way through the competition. Using his pure strength and muscles and even a force shield or two if necessary, he would easily defeat most of the rock golems, and be able to push down several trees, giving him an advantage as he launches himself forward at an amazing amount of speed. After a long and grueling trial of running, fighting golems, and making it through an obstacle. Wait a minute. I think I've seen this before. Wasn't this the UA Sports Festival? After the very original plot idea, Deku and the rest of the top 3, because everyone else sucks, made it there first, with Deku beating out everyone due to having his overpowered Juggernaut ability fueling him alongside One For All, with his physical stats just being too much for Todoroki's ice, and Bakugo's speed can't even match that. So he'd be the first one there. Deku would calm down as he then breathes in, his muscles then releasing as the veins in his overpowered body would begin to shrink, his body then going back to a normal size. Deku had learned this ability while he was with Gran Torino to manage his actual physical ability, and Gran Torino explained to him that if he can master this, he can maximize his power output without sacrificing speed. which is kind of irrelevant since Deku is basically a huge tank and has intense speed already. But if he could somehow optimize this power to make himself slimmer while retaining his strength and power, perhaps his speed would increase. Anyway, Koto would spit out water as he sees this massive hulking guy who had just been fighting golems and ripping trees apart just shrink until he looks like a somewhat fit but pretty normal high school kid. Those golems sure were something. I wonder how far behind Kanchan is. We would hear a little wheeze in the distance of a raging chihuahua. Anyway, after everyone else from the class fodder shows up, everyone would make it there when the teachers, or I guess I should say the guardians of the group, since they didn't really teach anything at this point, were telling the students that they'd have to make their own dinner since they're too lazy to do it. So they would somehow gaslight the entire class to begin cutting and prepping their own meals, with Bakugo showing how he actually is good at cooking. Kind of surprising. Meanwhile, Deku, who had never cooked really ever because he had always been too big and bulky and basically destroyed everything he touched as a kid, would have just sat and his mom would have done everything after the first several hundred plates had gone. So Deku's kind of useless here. He doesn't really have a lot of experience doing this, so he almost cuts himself a few times. Not like the knife would even damage his skin to begin with. Anyway, with Uraraka's help, gently showing him how to use the knife, Bakugo would just yell over him, telling the big Met Hulk to just stay out of his way. Deku would move his head downward, sighing as he says, I don't know, Uraraka, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I should just eat out for the rest of my life. I mean, personally, I'd be fine with that, if you want to, that's good, but in the context of dinner, no, Deku, that's not gonna happen. Uraraka, respectfully, what the fuck? Anyway, they'd successfully make dinner, and the class would, after eating their delicious curry, I don't know, whatever you pronounce it as, they'd make curry, eat it, and go to bed. Some of them would have gas that night. I don't know. Anyway, the team would wake up in the morning with Aizawa practically throwing them into a drill sergeant and saying that it's time for them to get their bodies and minds in shape. Mostly their bodies. Now get to work. 100 push-ups, 1,000 squats. Use your quirk in some weird way, I don't know. Heroes, let's start printing some fake AirPods with your ability. Just throws a pair of AirPods there and says get to work. Starts making Aizawa pods, just selling them on the black market. I don't know. Anyway, he gives everyone some convoluted training plan to just increase their quirk's ability. And for Deku's incredible plan, it would be for him to not destroy things. He would have to use punches and kicks on a tree without destroying it to gain quirk control or something. I don't know. Anyway, the entire class would begin their training, which is just kind of ridiculous. Like, let's just say this. You do not need to go to a hero school to understand that biologically, if you stress a part of your body, that when it recovers, it gets stronger. That's just basic physical knowledge. Are gym bros in this universe like the most powerful entities? Is just a gym bro with a decent quirk like stronger than most average heroes? Because that's what this is telling me. Where is the hero part of the... Anyway, early MHA had some holes in it, but let's ignore that for now. Besides the fact that Giga Chad probably could take All Might in a fight. Bakugo sticking his hands in boiling hot water, which I'm sure is just great for him to increase his ability, and then shooting off explosions in the air, which could theoretically deafen the other students from the reverberation. But whatever, it's fine, it's cool. None of them have hearing abilities anyway, right? Right? Isn't that right, Jiro? Jiro? Can you hear me? Jiro? Look, I have some beef with MHA's training arcs, okay? I realized later on, after watching all of the anime that's out currently, and that it's just mid. Their training arcs suck. The only good training arcs is the heroes' work studies, where they're actually working with pro heroes and Deku learns how to use full caling, and the other work study with Endeavor, where they actually learn things. It's almost like a good representation of real life, where school can only teach you so much, and internships and work actually teach you a majority of everything else. So, I guess go Horikoshi for making it realistic. But anyway, after the training for the next week or so, this is when the villains would attack, with their goal being to abduct Bakugo to somehow convert him to be evil, since he's a little angry chihuahua. I don't know. Anyway, Deku would be off doing his own training when night would hit, and he would have found Kota at that same spot as he had in the original anime, because Deku's personality isn't very different, which is where he knows where his hidden secret spot is, this cave. Everyone else would be in their normal positions when the smoke of poison gas fills the forest and Dabi comes to attack using the clone from Twice. Aizawa would take it out, and Deku would go after Kota, saying he knows where he is. This is when Aizawa would give everyone the permission under the hero Eraserhead to use their quirks to take out the villains, with the real war getting started. Class 1B and Class 1A would be working together here, with both teams using their quirks and abilities to take out the villains. Specifically, the Moonfish guy would be taken out by Todoroki and Bakugo, the Poison Gas guy by Kendo and Tetsutetsu, and Yaoyorozu and everyone else just doing their best to survive. This is when the real fun of the arc that everyone is excited for happens. Deku Juggernaut Edition versus Muscular. A perfect foil of a villain for him. A man with the ability of rage and musculature at his side. This man would lick his hand looking over and seeing the scrawny, thin Deku as he's about to kill Kota with his right arm busting up with tons of muscles over it as Deku's eyes would turn red, a spark of red energy covering his body as he lunges forward, his muscles ripping through his shirt and clothes as he still has pants on for the sake of looking cooler and also not, scarring Kota for life, as his shirt would rip open revealing his musculature self as he catches Muscular's fist with his left hand, protecting Kota as Kota sees this man once again. The same muscular hero he had seen come through the forest earlier and transform back into this boy. Muscular would laugh, saying, "Hey kid, you're like me, huh? So what are you doing wasting your time being a hero? With a quirk like yours, you and I would make a great duo." Work together with a villain? You have no idea who you're talking to. Deku would jab with his other hand into Muscular's chest, causing him to spit up blood, as he then creates more muscles trying to match Deku's strength. The two gripping hands as they have a wave of shockwaves crushing off each other, the mountainside beginning to crumble. Deku would turn back just for a moment, telling Kota to get out of there, as him and Muscular would go tumbling off the side of the cliff together. Deku would laugh as he smiles, saying that he's going to see that brat smile, as he pulls back a fist and punches Muscular again. The two huge men wrestling through the forest as trees would be knocked over, landscapes begin to move. Deku at this point isn't really going all out because he's not using One for All, but if he did, he probably could end it in one blow while also taking out a majority of the forest. And he can't do that because everyone else is still fighting. Deku would be tussling with Muscular for a while, with the two exchanging blows as Muscular gets bigger and bigger, being just about able to match Deku with Juggernaut as he turns into a ball of muscles, wondering why Deku is still somehow overpowering him. Muscular would throw an enhanced punch, a shockwave of wind already coming off of it, as Deku would merely hold open his palm. Instead of catching the fist with his hand, a wave of energy would block it, this being a wave of energy of force field from Juggernaut. The force field repelling the attack, proving Muscular's fist to be useless. With his other hand, he'd cover it with a barrier of psychic energy, and then enhancing it further with One for All, would punch Muscular in the jaw, giving him a concussion as he falls over to the ground. Deku would then stand up as he then takes one more fist, raising it into the air and slamming it down with a sledgehammer right into Muscular's back, causing his bones to crack as the villain would be knocked unconscious in 2 hits. Deku would lunge back, punching his fist into the side of the cliff that had not crumbled, and climbing back up to Kota. Kota would have tears in his eyes, seeing his hero having defeated Muscular looking down the side of the cliff, and calling Deku my hero. Haha, I know, the name of the show, isn't that cool? Anyway, Deku would tell Kota to climb on as he puts him on his shoulder, carrying him like a little kid, as he runs back to the forest, leaps and bounds, jumping over fallen trees. He would grab Muscular, taking him with and pulling him along, as he throws him at Aizawa's feet within a matter of minutes, saying that he took this one out, but he might still be dangerous. Instead, we have a different problem. Because Muscular was taken out way too quickly, Deku didn't stall for time in fighting him, so he didn't ask them why the villains were there, which is why he learned that Bakugo was the target of the strike to begin with. So, because he didn't talk to Muscular, he has no idea why the villains are here. This causes Deku to mostly have no immediate need, no hurry in finding Bakugo. and gives the villains exactly enough what they need, letting Mr. Compress kidnap Bakugo and take him with Kurogiri back to the villain's base. Luckily, Yamamomo would still think of putting the tracker on the Nomu that had attacked them. With the Nomu being essentially a puppet, it wouldn't notice or care, so the Nomu facility would be located through her ability. Yay, she does something useful. Let's go. This is the last time I think it happens, aside from maybe, I don't know, probably later in the manga, I'm not sure. But anyway, she does something useful, and the heroes now have a lead on how to hunt down the League of Villains with a tracker in one of their Nomu bases, this being a location where they're storing the Nomus until they're being used for missions. And so a strike team would be composed from the pro heroes, with the students being left out of protecting their classmate, and everything going down in the Kamino ward. That, of course, being the upcoming battle between All Might versus All for One of the greatest turning points in the entire story, and beginning to be the downfall of Hero Society as a whole, with All Might having to sacrifice all of his power to take out All for One. But we're not there yet. Let's go back to the version of the story we're following, which is where Deku has the strength of Juggernaut aiding him from the Marvel Comics universe. Anyway, the students would still have a plan, with them convincing Yamamoto to give them a tracker as well, so they can go and try to save Kacchan, or Bakugo. Eventually, the night of the raid comes where the heroes have made their move, with all of them invading the Kamino ward, where the League of Villains and All for One is keeping their shit. And also where Bakugo is being kept in that knockoff villains pub from Hishi, if you guys know what that is. Anyway, total internet classic, but whatever. The heroes would arrive, with them taking on the high-grade Nomu that are released alongside the League of Villains like Shigaraki, the blood-sucking bitch, and, you know, all of those guys. Anyway, everyone shows up, including the kids from Class 1A, who are now dressed up like gangsters for some reason, with Deku being the only one who doesn't really need to change his appearance, with him just letting his form go and being his big buff adult-looking form. Anyway, as they arrive closer and the fight begins, with Shigaraki being forced into that gooey teleportation mass by All for One and disappearing, this is when Deku's plan would take place, with everyone using Ida's speed and reaching out for Kirishima. Bakugo would use his quirk flying up and then being saved by the kids from Class 1A, with them successfully allowing All Might to fight at full strength. This is when Deku, when he's running away, would turn around seeing All Might as he's about to get blown back by All for One, watching his mentor and teacher get eviscerated by a blast of cutting airwaves, with All for One's body growing in size. Deku would grit his teeth, telling them to go on without him as he turns running back, as sparks would cover his body as he channels into the power of One for All. Out of the corner of All Might's eye, he'd hold his hand out, screaming in his heart for him to run, saying it's not his time yet. This is when he's about to get hit by another blow and about to lose his muscle form on TV, when suddenly his protege would appear. In his full buffed up form, Deku would tank the blast, holding his arms in front of him like a cross shape, as he would use his power of Juggernaut combined with One for All to create a telekinetic shield that blocks the blast from All for One. The two heroes now taking on All for One together, All Might would laugh, saying that he didn't expect him to have to fight this guy so soon. Deku would laugh as well, saying that he's ready for this and he's not going to let him die. No, he'd smile just like his mentor. They're going to take him down together. So as a result, All for One automatically knows who the next holder of One for All is, much earlier than he had previously let on he knew about, with him having initially told All Might in this fight that he knew about Izuku Midoriya, but regardless of that, the cat's out of the bag. As the fight would now get more intense, All for One is now on the back foot, having two heroes fighting him, with one of them definitely being on his level, that being Deku, and All Might basically sputtering out with all of his power, as Deku would put All for One into a hold, allowing All Might to get in a huge punch on his gut. All Might then taking the fight up into the air as he uses a Detroit Smash, causing a tornado to send All for One flying into a building. All for One would crash into the glass as Deku, using his Juggernaut, would come crashing through, toppling the building on top of All for One. All for One would get thrown out of the rubble by Izuku, and Deku would watch as All Might puts all of his strength, saying for young Midoriya to watch him. His form being revealed on TV as all of his strength leaves his body, as he uses a United States of Smash, destroying his body alongside with the embers of One for All, and finally putting down All For One, taking the villain down and having him locked into custody. All For One would laugh, having been impressed by this new wielder of One For All, but now knowing that his protege will have to get even stronger to take on a monster like that, wondering about what sort of enhancement quirk this kid has that's pushed One For All so far in just a few years. Everyone would rejoice that Bakugo had been saved, with the news stations now wondering who this mysterious, huge hero it had been that had come in and helped All Might. Izuku would be instructed to not ever access his muscle form unless absolutely necessary, with him being forced to control his power and keep himself in his smaller, more age-appropriate form for, I guess, his size. Izuku would laugh, saying that had been the plan anyway, with him having only used this imperfect power to help his mentor without revealing his identity to the public. Deku would shrink back to his normal size, demonstrating that he is capable of controlling his height and size as well as his strength, depending on how much effort he puts in. He does not reveal about One For All, with him and All Might having that discussion later about how All Might's definitely lost it by this point, and how it's his turn. And All Might never did the pointing finger thing on the camera saying it's your turn now, because originally that was a message to Midoriya, but definitely wasn't necessary. But for the sake of things being cool, let's say he does anyway, just because it was a really good moment in the show. Anyway, things proceed on as normal, with the season coming to an end. After this, things get a little more speculative, because with All Might out of the picture now and Deku already having a grasp on One For All, I can see a few different routes happening. The first of which being that All Might wants Deku to curry and take the spotlight as soon as possible, with Deku taking his vigilante arc, quote-unquote, early. So instead of him continuing to go to school at UA, I could see All Might pulling some connections and getting him either into like Endeavor's agency or one of the other top 10 heroes agencies to get him trained, so he could like go straight into hero work. I don't know how that would work, but I would assume it'd be something like a apprenticeship in real life, so that Deku could start being a pro hero immediately instead of having to like graduate in 4 years because of the situation of One For All and All For One. So I don't know how that would work out, but All Might has a ton of connections, so it could happen, especially because he knows that Deku has full mastery of the power at this point. Well, at least what he believes is full mastery, since the quirks have not awakened yet. And that's a whole nother issue, with the quirks awakening within One For All later on in the season, like I guess in the next 2 seasons. Deku, for now, wouldn't have any knowledge of them, aside from the vestiges he's seen before, so I think going into the overhaul arc, he'd just be way better off, because even without Eri, he has some counters to overhaul, because he has his telekinetic shield ability, so I don't think that Chisaki could even physically touch him, which was one of the biggest concerns, is that overhaul could touch Deku and either remove his quirk or kill him or anything really. But because of Juggernaut's unique properties of that telekinetic ability, as long as Deku doesn't play around, I don't think he could really be hurt by anything that overhaul can do. Maybe instead of having Eri helping Deku achieve 100%, this would just be Deku's own version of the All For One versus All Might fight, instead of overhaul acting as his foil. And this could be his first debut as a hero again, with maybe him being caught on camera in the same form in his costume, and the interviewers catching him this time, asking who he is, about his status, if he's a pro hero or not, and his battle with All Might from the last few months. Oh yeah, speaking of the overhaul arc, I think Night Eye would be much more willing to accept Izuku as a wielder of One For All, because he has a quirk by himself for one thing, and he's also shown to be capable with using One For All. So, unlike the original Izuku Midoriya, who, in Night Eye's perspective, did not deserve the power, this version doesn't really need his approval, because he's already seen him fight alongside his mentor and keep up and even surpass him, at least from what he saw on TV. So, I don't think Night Eye's story plot is as relevant just by the simple addition of Izuku having a fairly strong quirk. And Juggernaut's pretty strong, yeah, but it's nothing insane. Like, there are way more crazy quirks in MHA, like the New World Order, the one that you can just use to rewrite reality, because that's fair, and other things like that. So I think just Deku having any ability over what he had makes him so broken with his intelligence and the other quirks from One For All that anything that is a story threat at this point is kind of nullified. And even going into like the Tartarus arc and all the villains escaping towards the end of season 6, because season 5 was, well, kind of easy to ignore aside from the quirks appearing and I guess My Villain Academia. But going into the war arc, I think Deku would just be the main frontrunner of the hero's side, with him already being about as strong, if not stronger, than Endeavor. So I don't really see MHA having as much tension. So I guess I would just call it here, because even if we see Shigaraki get one all for one and the quirk is passed on and we're in that situation which we're facing in the manga, spoilers I guess from this point on, even in the manga right now, Deku and Bakugo are in a position where it looks like they're going to win. So I don't see how a Izuku who already has quirk mastery of his own quirk and the basic physical enhancement from One For All wouldn't be able to do the same. And by this point, I'm sure he would have been getting better with the quirks from One For All, because he grew up with a quirk, so he knows how to use it. It's a little different. The situation just isn't the same. So my argument is that basically after the Kamino fight, everything else is just like playing on low difficulty, because Izuku in the original timeline of MHA already had enough struggle because he didn't have mastery of his quirk. That is where so much of his struggle comes from. He was gifted, handpicked one of the strongest quirks in the world, and most of the struggle he gains is because of having to grow into that power. But without that challenge, I think MHA is just a lot less interesting, which is unfortunate, but I think this is a good spot to end the story considering how everything's progressed. I think MHA would end with Izuku trying to save Shigaraki just like in the original manga because of how he is. And I think he'd probably have an easier time as well, just because now he has a telekinetic ability from Juggernaut, so he doesn't even have to touch Shigaraki to fight him, which is one of the big issues right now going in the manga, is that he can't touch him because he'd get decayed. So with Juggernaut, he doesn't have to touch him. He can just physically slam him into walls, into the air, and with his body. He can telekinetically body Shigaraki. So I think that pretty much just brings it to an end. If that's unsatisfying, I would consider reading the manga and applying the idea for yourself, and maybe letting me know in the comments what you think would be different if he did have Juggernaut right now in the manga. And if you made it this far, I hope you did enjoy the story, and look forward to more full stories coming out. I'll be trying to finish all of the full stories that for the remaining series that are ongoing on this channel. The next one that I'll be tackling for sure will be What If Naruto Was a Warlock? And that one's going to be a long one, let's just say. So look forward to that if you enjoyed the Naruto content. And if you want more MHA What Ifs, you can go check out my other two MHA What Ifs that are complete. What If Deku Had Rewind, which is a significantly more fun series for me to have written. I really enjoyed that one. It has a lot of intelligent battles and combat involved because of the nature of Rewind. So I think you guys would enjoy that if you liked this series. And also What If Deku Had Chakra, which is just a power fantasy, I guess kind of similar to this as well, of how Juggernaut works. So if either of those sound interesting to you, go check those out. I'll try and link them in the description. But yeah, I'll see you guys whenever I post next, which hopefully is sooner than it was with this most recent gap. And once again, I'm That One Weeb, and it's been a pleasure. I'll see you guys next time. Alright, bye now.